All right, ready to dive in? Today, it's Dale Carnegie time. How to win friends and influence people.
A classic.
It really is, and we're going to find out why, almost a century later, people are still reading it like crazy. We got all the good stuff, the notes, the highlights, ready for you. Let's unlock these secrets. What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Carnegie spent all those years teaching business people, right?
Yeah.
And he really just boiled it all down into this super practical handbook. But he didn't just pull this out of thin air. He did his homework. I mean, psychology, philosophy, biographies of all these powerful people.
Wow.
He was looking for timeless principles, not just, stuff that was trendy.
And he definitely found them. We're talking the same insights that helped, people like Charles Schwab, reach crazy levels of success.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And what are we going to do today? We're going to break down Carnegie's big ideas, dive into all those fascinating real-life stories he uses, and pull out some seriously actionable advice, stuff you can use starting today.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right. So Carnegie, right off the bat, he's like, don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Sounds pretty simple on the surface, but why does he say it's pointless to criticize?
I mean, when was the last time you immediately admitted you were wrong?
Oh, good point.
Yeah, Carnegie was onto something really deep about human nature. We don't blame ourselves, do we? Even when we're, totally in the wrong.
No, we are experts at justifying our actions.
Oh, absolutely. Even if those actions were, let's just say, not our finest moments.
Exactly. It's that need to justify ourselves that he was talking about.
Right, we almost can't help it. We have to see ourselves in the best possible light, even if it means bending the truth a little, So if we try to point out someone's mistakes, they're probably just going to get defensive, not actually change their behavior. It's that story he tells about Two Gun Crowley?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. A notorious criminal.
Yeah.
And even while he's bleeding from gunshot wounds,
yeah,
he's claiming to have a kind heart. Shows you the disconnect between how we see ourselves and how the world might see us.
So instead of criticizing, what do? Just let bad behavior slide?
No, not at all. It's about shifting how we approach things. Instead of attacking the person, right? We focus on understanding, try to see things from their perspective, even if you don't agree. You're not condoning bad behavior. You're just choosing a path that might actually lead to change.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah. Understand the why behind the behavior, not just react to the what.
Exactly. Takes more effort, sure, but the payoff can be huge.
Okay, on to a big one. Give honest, sincere appreciation. Carnegie thinks everyone craves appreciation and that giving it freely is like a secret weapon for bitter relationships.
This was really fascinating because Carnegie takes it a step further. He thinks even dictators and hardcore criminals deep down crave that feeling of importance. Yeah. Maybe they go about it in twisted ways, but that desire is still there. It's powerful, that insight into what makes us tick.
Those millionaires who fund expeditions just to get a mountain named after them?
Oh, yeah. Talk about wanting to feel important.
Right. Or what about Mrs. McKinley, constantly needing attention from her husband, even, during important presidential meetings?
It seems kind of comical, but it illustrates this really deep-seated need we all have, to feel valued, to be significant.
Almost like it's part of just being human.
Absolutely. It's driving everything from Napoleon's ambitions to our everyday interactions with our families and friends.
Makes you wonder, how often do we express genuine appreciation to those around us? Are we leaving a trail of gratitude sparks wherever we go?
It really makes you think.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to be more mindful of that.
Me too. Now, this next principle, this is really at the core of Carnegie's whole philosophy. It's understanding that the only way to influence people is to speak to what they desire, not your own desires, theirs.
That's arousing the other person an eager want, right?
Good thing is figuring out what they're hungry for and showing them how to satisfy that hunger.
It's like that fishing analogy he uses.
Oh, yeah.
You can't catch a fish with strawberries and cream, right?
Nope. You got to bait the hook with something they actually want, a juicy worm.
Exactly. We all want things. But instead of leading with our own agenda, he's saying, hey, Shift your focus. What makes the other person tick? What are their goals and dreams?
That's the key.
And then you can show them how to achieve those things. It's brilliant, but so simple. It reminds me of that story about Emerson and his son, trying to push a calf into a barn.
Oh, I love that story.
They're like struggling, right? And that calf's not budging an inch.
Stubborn calf.
And it's only when they start leading it with food, appealing to what the calf wants, that they finally get it inside.
Yeah.
Perfect. It's like such a perfect illustration, right? So often we try to force our will on others.
Yeah.
But it's so much more effective to work with their desires, guide them towards that shared goal.
And it all ties back to this bigger picture of persuasion. It's not about coercion or, being manipulative.
Right.
It's about understanding, finding that win-win solution.
Exactly.
So the challenge for all of us listening is, what are those worms? What can we offer to help others achieve their goals?
That's how you build real influence.
That leads to another crucial point. Become genuinely interested in other people.
Yeah.
This one's about shifting our focus from me to we. It's about actively listening, engaging with people's passions, and making them feel truly seen and heard.
Love it.
Now, I'm curious about the story Carnegie tells about Howard Thurston, the famous magician. What does magic have to do with genuine interest?
Well, Thurston credited his success not just to his, magic skills, but to his sincere interest in the audience.
He didn't see them as like suckers to be tricked. He saw them as individuals, each with their own unique story and perspective. And that genuine interest really resonated, drawing people in, making his performances even more powerful.
That's so cool. So it's not about being fake or anything. It's about that authentic connection you get from truly valuing another person.
Exactly. Seeing the human being, not just the job title, the uniform, whatever mask they might be wearing. It's recognizing that shared humanity that connects us all.
Yeah.
But Carnegie doesn't stop there. He lays out a whole arsenal of principles, and they all tie back to this idea of understanding and connecting with others. Ready for more?
Absolutely. Bring him on.
Well, there's the simple but contagious power of a smile. He even talks about Charles Schwab's $1 million smile.
Wow.
Highlighting how a genuine smile can just instantly disarm people and create a positive atmosphere.
I like that.
And then there's remembering names. Sounds simple, right? But Carnegie stresses how incredibly important this is to people.
It shows that you value them. Like you took the time to remember something about them. You're saying, hey, you matter to me.
Exactly. He talks about how FDR was a master at this, remembering names even of people he'd only met, like once.
Amazing.
That level of attention, it makes people feel great.
Mm-hmm.
And then being a good listener, which, let's be honest, it's a pretty rare skill these days. Carnegie says good listeners are rare, and he gives you tips on how to encourage people to talk about themselves. And who doesn't love to talk about themselves, right? He has all these fascinating examples of this in action, like Edward L. Chalif trying to get funding for a Boy Scout jamboree.
Yeah.
Instead of just launching into his request.
Right.
Challis starts by talking to this business leader about something he knew the guy was super proud of. His $1 million check.
Smart.
And by appealing to the man's interests, Chalif not only got the funding he asked for, he actually ended up getting much more.
Wow. Win-win.
Exactly. It just goes to show that taking the time to understand what motivates someone can pay off big time.
Then there's making the other person feel important. Genuinely, of course. Not like in some phony way. It's like that story about the Packard car.
Oh, yeah. The woman gives away her prized possession. And I'm not talking about just any car, a Packard, to someone who showed her genuine appreciation.
Made her feel valued.
Exactly. It's a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful gifts aren't about money. They're about making someone feel truly valued.
Now, we got to talk about arguments because Carnegie definitely goes there.
He does. And he takes a pretty strong stance. You can't win an argument. He learned this from Sir Ross Smith, the famous aviator, who said that even if you technically win an argument, you've probably lost something far more important.
The relationship.
Exactly. So even if you're right, you might end up damaging the relationship, which just isn't worth it.
So what does he suggest?
Instead of digging your heels in, emphasize points of agreement. Use tact, diplomacy, try to really see their point of view. He talks about John D. Rockefeller Jr. Remember how Rockefeller won over those striking miners?
Yeah, they were violently opposed to him at first.
They were, but instead of condemning them, he expresses empathy and focuses on common ground. Amazing how a drop of honey can be so much more persuasive than a gallon of gall. Carnegie's big on starting things off in a friendly way, building bridges, not burning them. Like that saying, you can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. And Carnegie gives a great example of this, like, from his own life, where he was trying to get these boys to put out these fires they'd built in a park.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that one.
So at first, he comes at them with all this authority, threats.
Yeah.
And they obey, but like grudgingly.
Right.
But then he tries something different. He starts by acknowledging their perspective, even mentioning how much he loved building fires when he was a kid.
That's smart.
And then they happily cooperate because he treated them with respect and understanding. It's a powerful lesson.
It's like connect on a human level first, then address the issue at hand. Now, what about that secret of Socrates technique?
Yes. This one's all about getting the other person saying yes, yes early on.
Oh, interesting.
So you start with points of agreement, creates that sense of momentum, and then it's harder for them to disagree with you later on.
You're kind of subtly steering the conversation, right?
Exactly. It's a great strategy when you're dealing with someone who's, initially resistant to your ideas. And Carnegie, he actually tells this story about a banker who used this to win over a really tough client. Instead of laying down the law, he asks questions, actively listens, searches for that common ground.
And it worked.
It did.
Yeah.
The client felt heard, respected, and that paved the way for a successful business relationship. Sometimes the best way to influence someone is to just let them do most of the talking.
Huh. And speaking of letting others express themselves, Carnegie also talks about handling complaints effectively. He says, let the other person talk themselves out.
Yeah.
Now, that sounds like something I'd need to practice. Why does he emphasize this?
Well, think about it. When someone's upset, they need to vent, right? Like they got to get all those feelings out in the open before they can even listen to reason. Trying to argue or reason with them while they're still in that state. It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline.
You're just going to make it worse.
Exactly. And Carnegie tells this funny story about a salesman who kind of stumbled upon this principle by accident. He totally lost his voice, couldn't speak during this important meeting.
Oh no, what did he do?
Had no choice but to let the client do all the talking. And guess what? He ended up landing the biggest order of his career.
Wow, sometimes the best thing to do is just shut up and listen.
Right. The universe has a funny way of teaching us lessons. But it also speaks to the power of letting others express themselves fully. They can process their emotions, feel heard, and maybe even arrive at a solution on their own.
It's like that saying, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And listening is a really powerful way to show you care.
It really is. And that leads us to another one of Carnegie's gems. Try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view. It's about cultivating empathy, stepping into their shoes, even if you don't agree with their perspective.
He uses that analogy about causes and effects.
He does. He says, by becoming interested in the cause, we are less likely to dislike the effect. It's like, if we understand why someone's behaving a certain way, we're more likely to be compassionate, less likely to judge them harshly.
See the bigger picture.
Exactly. And he even quotes Kenneth M. Good, who said, success in dealing with people depends on a sympathetic grasp of the other person's viewpoint. Carnegie himself gives an example about complimenting his wife's gardening, even though he didn't really get her passion for it.
But by making an effort to see things from her perspective, it actually strengthened their relationship. Even small gestures of understanding can go a long way.
Absolutely. And, Carnegie acknowledges that sometimes people they mess up, they behave badly. But he reminds us, you deserve very little credit for being what you are. It's humbling.
Yeah, it is. It makes you realize, we're all products of our circumstances, our upbringing, all of our experiences.
Exactly. And so instead of judging others for their shortcomings, he encourages us to offer sympathy, understanding. He even tells a story about making a mistake on a radio broadcast. Got tons of angry letters.
Oh, I can imagine.
He was tempted to lash out at these critics, but he chose a different path. Acknowledged his mistake, offered a sincere apology.
That's taking the high road.
It's powerful, Humility and accountability can disarm even the most hostile critics. We all make mistakes. It's how we handle those mistakes that defines us.
So if we have to offer criticism, how do we do it effectively without, alienating the person?
Carnegie has some great advice for that. He says, start by talking about your own mistakes first.
Oh, that's good.
Instantly disarms the other person, creates a sense of shared vulnerability.
Levels the playing field.
Exactly. He gives the example of a German diplomat, Otto von Bülow, who managed to smooth things over with Kaiser Wilhelm II after accidentally insulting him.
How do you do that?
By acknowledging his own error first. allowed the Kaiser to save face, and it led to reconciliation. Sometimes the best way to win someone over is to acknowledge your own, fallibility.
Like you're saying, hey, I mess up too. We're all human.
Right. It creates that space for open communication. And to make criticism even more palatable, Carnegie suggests, calling attention to people's mistakes indirectly. Be subtle and tactful rather than coming across as harsh or judgmental.
Didn't he tell that story about the piano teacher and the little girl with the really long fingernails?
Yes. Instead of directly criticizing her nails, the teacher compliments them and then gently suggests that, maybe trimming them might make playing the piano easier.
So much better than, your nails are too long, go cut them.
Right. The girl chose to trim her nails because she felt understood and respected, not criticized. It's a beautiful example of how framing criticism in a positive light can lead to positive change.
And to encourage that change, Carnegie says it's important to praise improvement, even if it's just a little bit. Recognizing those small steps forward can motivate people to keep striving for excellence. It reminds me of how B.F. Skinner used this principle in his research.
Oh, yeah. Skinner found that minimizing criticism and emphasizing praise led to much better outcomes. It's a reminder that encouragement is often a much better motivator than punishment. We all thrive on positive reinforcement, even as adults.
Absolutely. So how do we give constructive feedback without, making enemies? Seems tricky.
Carnegie's advice is to talk about your own mistakes before criticizing the other person. Again, it's disarming defensiveness and creating empathy.
He tells that story about the supervisor who learned this the hard way. He criticizes this employee, really harshly in front of everyone else.
Oh, yeah.
And it totally destroyed their working relationship.
Yeah, public humiliation is never a good look. Creates resentment, shuts down communication. It's so much better to address things privately, with respect and a focus on solutions.
There's also that story about a woman who made a mistake on this big project at work.
Yes. Instead of getting yelled at, her boss was totally supportive and understanding.
Oh, that's nice.
Focused on what she'd learned from the experience and encouraged her to keep going.
And she ended up succeeding.
She did. It shows how leaders can create a culture of learning and growth, not fear and blame.
Exactly. It's about fostering a safe space where people feel comfortable taking risks, learning from their mistakes.
Now, speaking of making people feel comfortable, Carnegie also stresses the importance of letting the other person save face, even when they're wrong.
I remember that story about the guy who was about to break his lease on an apartment.
Oh, yeah.
What happened there?
So instead of arguing with him, the landlord appealed to his sense of fairness and gave him some time to cool down. And guess what? He ended up staying because he felt respected.
Sometimes winning an argument means losing a customer, a friend, or a tenant.
It's about choosing your battles wisely. Sometimes the relationship is more important than being right.
Now, Carnegie also talks about making the other person feel important. Sincerely important, not in a phony way. And he calls this a miracle worker when it's done right.
It really is.
He uses George Eastman, the founder of Kodak, as an example, right?
He does. Eastman spent hours showing a potential supplier his most prized possessions.
No.
Not to show off, but because he was genuinely passionate about sharing them.
Made the supplier feel valued.
Exactly. And guess what? He ended up getting a massive order. It's incredible how genuine connections can open doors.
It really is. And building on that, Carnegie also encourages us to, arouse in the other person an eager want. So appealing to someone's desires is way more effective than forcing them to do something they don't want to do. He tells that story about a man trying to sell bread to a hotel steward.
Oh yeah, for years he couldn't get anywhere.
Right, but what was the secret to his success?
He found out that the steward was passionate about this group called the Hotel Greeters of America. And by talking about the greeters, showing genuine interest,
He finally won him over.
got a huge order. Sometimes the key to success is finding that point of connection, that spark.
And speaking of sparking interest, Carnegie's also a big believer in, showmanship to get your message across.
Oh yeah, dramatizing your ideas. He's about making them come alive, not just presenting dry facts and figures. He tells a story about a salesman trying to convince a cosmetics manufacturer to buy his product.
And he had tried 150 times.
Over 150, couldn't get anywhere.
I bet he was desperate.
So he walks into the manufacturer's office and dumps 32 jars of competing cold creams on his desk.
Whoa! Talk about dramatic.
It worked though. Seeing all those competing products made the guy realize he needed a better solution, and fast. Sometimes you need a little drama.
So when all else fails, bring on the theatrics.
Well, not exactly. Carnegie's last resort suggestion is to throw down a challenge.
Oh, right. He's saying tap into people's competitive spirit, right?
You got it. People are often motivated by wanting to prove themselves, to excel, to win. He shares the story about Charles Schwab, who challenged some mill workers to see who could make the most steel.
By tapping into their competitive drive, he got amazing results.
It's true. Sometimes the best way to motivate people is to give them a goal worth striving for, a challenge that pushes them to be their absolute best. And that brings us to how to win people to your way of thinking. This is where Carnegie really dives into persuasion, leadership, all that good stuff.
Yeah, the art of getting people on board. So where does he start?
Well, he kicks things off with an idea that might seem a little counterintuitive. The only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it.
Wait, so he's not saying to be a pushover, is he? Like, just agree with everyone?
No, not at all. It's more about recognizing that most arguments, they're just a waste of energy.
They don't really change anyone's mind?
Exactly. And they often just make people dig in even deeper.
So what's the alternative?
Focus on building bridges, finding that common ground, steering the conversation towards something that actually benefits both sides.
Okay, I like that. Didn't he tell a story about a salesman named Patrick J. O'Hare who was really good at this?
Oh yeah, O'Hare, instead of bashing his competitors, he would actually praise their products. Seriously, he'd say things like, if you buy the Who's It truck, you'll never make a mistake. See, by acknowledging the other person's perspective.
He's kind of disarming them, right?
Exactly, and making them more open to hearing his pitch. It's like turning a potential adversary into an ally.
Pretty clever. Any other examples of this?
Well, Carnegie talks about how Abraham Lincoln used this principle to avoid a huge conflict with General George Meade after the Battle of Gettysburg.
Oh, right. Lincoln was furious that Meade had let Robert E. Lee's army escape. That could have been a disaster.
It could have been. But instead of sending that scathing letter, the one that would have completely alienated Meade, Lincoln chose to hold back.
He knew criticizing Meade wouldn't change what happened.
Right, and it would just damage their relationship, which was crucial at that point in the war.
Talk about leadership through restraint.
It's a great lesson for all of us, really.
Yeah. So avoiding unnecessary conflict is key. What else does Carnegie recommend?
He says, show respect for the other person's opinions. Never say, you're wrong.
Easier said than done, right? I know I've definitely blurted that out a few times.
We all have. But Carnegie says it almost always backfires.
Yeah.
The minute you tell someone they're wrong, they get defensive. They shut down.
No more dialogue.
Exactly. So instead, acknowledge their perspective, even if you disagree with it completely. Say things like, I understand why you feel that way, or that's an interesting point of view.
It's about keeping the conversation going, right?
Yes.
Oh.
Finding that common ground. Now, if you're the one who's wrong, Carnegie has some advice for that too. Admit it quickly and emphatically.
Own up to your mistakes.
Exactly. It can actually build trust and make you more credible in the long run.
Shows humility, right?
Right. He tells this story about a lumber inspector who was rejecting a whole shipment of wood because he was misinterpreting the grading rules.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And the guy who supplied the wood, instead of arguing, he gently guided the inspector to see his mistake.
So, like, leading him to the right answer.
Yes. Patience and tact saved his company a lot of money.
Sometimes the best way to win is to let the other person discover the truth themselves.
Exactly. So let's move on to getting people to cooperate. Carnegie's big on starting interactions in a friendly way.
Makes sense. Set a positive tone.
He even quotes John D. Rockefeller Jr., who said, if you come at me with your fist doubled, I can promise you mine will double as fast as yours.
Whoa. But if you come at them with a smile, wanting to understand.
They're much more likely to cooperate.
Carnegie tells that incredible story about Rockefeller winning over the striking miners, right? They hated him at first.
Violently opposed. But instead of fighting back, he expressed empathy for their situation, focused on their shared interests.
It's amazing that worked.
It shows that even in super tense situations, kindness and understanding can go a long way.
Powerful. And didn't he mention the secret of Socrates here too?
He did. Get the other person saying yes, yes, immediately. Start with points of agreement. Build that momentum.
Get them nodding along.
Exactly. And there's that story about the salesman who loses his voice right before this big meeting.
Oh no, not again. What happened?
He had to let the client do all the talking. And you know what? He got the biggest contract of his career.
Wow, the power of listening.
It really shows that letting the other person express themselves can lead to amazing results.
They feel heard, and then they're more likely to come up with a solution that works for everyone. So it's not just about listening. It's about letting the other person do a lot of the talking.
Right. Let the other person do a great deal of the talking. That's straight from Carnegie. He's all about letting people persuade themselves.
So don't overwhelm them with your arguments.
Ask questions. Listen. Let them reach their own conclusions. He tells a story about how he used this to calm down an angry tenant. The guy was ready to break his lease, but Carnegie just listened patiently.
Oh.
He turned the situation around, even negotiated a rent reduction.
Okay, active listening is officially a superpower. Which reminds me of another one of Carnegie's principles. Try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view. It's like that story with the kids building fires in the park.
Oh, that's a good one.
At first, he's all about authority, threats, but then he tries something different, right? He acknowledges their perspective, even says he loved building fires as a kid.
Connecting on a human level.
And it worked.
Empathy and understanding go a long way. To encourage cooperation, Carnegie also suggests using language that emphasizes those shared goals, desires.
It's about finding the common ground.
Exactly. He says, be sympathetic with the other person's ideas and desires. Validate their feelings, even if you don't agree with their actions.
There's another example with the piano lessons, right?
Yes. The woman trying to get her granddaughter to cut her nails. Instead of criticizing, she compliments the girl's nails.
And then suggests that maybe shorter nails would make playing the piano easier.
It's so much more effective than just giving orders.
The girl felt understood, not attacked.
And she was happy to cooperate. Carnegie also talks about appealing to nobler motives.
So, assume the best in people.
Believe that people want to do the right thing. He tells a story about a man trying to collect a debt. Instead of threats, he appeals to the customer's sense of fairness and honesty.
And it worked.
The customer paid up. He didn't want to let down the person who'd shown him respect and trust.
It's not just about getting what you want. It's about inspiring people to do what's right.
Exactly. And then there's the dramatizing your ideas thing.
Bring on the showmanship.
Carnegie says sometimes you got to be a bit dramatic to make your ideas memorable. He tells a story about a salesman trying to convince a grocer to buy new cash registers.
How do you make it dramatic? Did he, jump on the counter?
Well, to show the grocer how much money he was losing with his old equipment, he threw a handful of pennies on the floor.
I bet that got his attention.
It sure did. The sound of those pennies, it drove home the point. Sometimes a little theatrics is all it takes.
And finally, Carnegie's last resort for motivating people: throw down a challenge.
Tap into that competitive spirit. He tells a story about Charles Schwab challenging some mill workers to see who could produce the most steel.
And that worked.
Of course, they wanted to prove themselves. Sometimes the best way to motivate people is to give them a goal that pushes them to be their best.
Wow, that was an amazing journey through Dale Carnegie's wisdom. It's incredible how relevant all this stuff still is today.
He really understood human nature. And he wasn't about tricks or manipulation. He was about genuine connection, about understanding people and inspiring them to be their best.
And remember what he said, we got to reflect on our experiences. How can we use these ideas in our own lives? What are we going to do differently tomorrow to build better relationships?
Great question. That's something to think about. Until next time, happy connecting.